You know how you're told to never go digging into the past? Yeah, well, I learned that the hard way. It all started when I was cleaning out my old email inbox, just mindlessly deleting junk from years ago. I came across an unread email buried in my spam folder. It was dated 10 years back with no subject line, and the sender's address was just a string of random letters and numbers. Normally, I would have deleted it without a second thought, but something made me click. The email said, "Your wife cheated on you with someone you know. Ask her about Ryan. She'll lie." I laughed at first like, who even sends stuff like this? Some troll, obviously. But as much as I tried to brush it off, the name Ryan stuck in my head. I vaguely remembered my wife mentioning someone named Ryan way back when we were going through a rough patch. I told myself I was overthinking it. Still, I couldn't let it go. That night at dinner, I casually brought it up. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I tried to play it off like it was funny. "Babe," I said halfway through eating, "you won't believe this. I found some random spam email saying you cheated on me with some guy named Ryan. Weird, right?" She froze mid-bite. Not a subtle hesitation, not a small pause, she froze. For a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then she quickly smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "That's crazy," she said, laughing nervously. "Who sends stuff like that?" Her reaction wasn't what I expected. I mean, if someone accused me of something ridiculous, I'd roll my eyes and move on. But the way she fidgeted, the way her voice got all high-pitched, it wasn't right. After dinner, I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my head. Every time I thought about her reaction, my gut twisted a little more. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there was no way she could have cheated on me. We'd been married for 15 years, for God's sake. But then again, there was that one time 10 years ago when things weren't so perfect between us. After dinner, I tried to shake the whole thing off, but that little voice in my head wouldn't shut up. Her reaction, it wasn't normal. If it was just some random spam email, why did she look like I'd caught her in a lie? Why did she freeze like that? I didn't want to seem like a paranoid idiot, so I decided not to push it right away. Instead, I kept my mouth shut and just observed. And let me tell you, when you start looking for something suspicious, you find things. Over the next few days, her behavior started to shift. Or maybe it was always like that and I was just noticing it now. Either way, she seemed nervous around me. She'd laugh too hard at my jokes, like she was trying to distract me from something. Her phone? Always glued to her side. And she'd started asking weird questions out of nowhere. Like, "You don't believe that email, do you?" I hadn't even brought it up again. Why would she ask that if there wasn't something she was worried about? My mind kept wandering back to that time in our marriage when things had felt off. It was about 10 years ago. I just lost my job, and we were drowning in debt. Our fights back then were loud, ugly, and constant. She'd started working extra hours to help with the bills, or at least that's what she said at the time. Now, with that damn email in my head, I started to remember the nights she came home late, smelling like she'd showered recently, her hair still damp. Back then, I chalked it up to her stress. I thought, she's probably just avoiding being around me while I'm unemployed and miserable. But now, I wasn't so sure. I started digging. Started small. I checked her social media from that time, Facebook posts, Instagram pictures. Nothing jumped out right away. She wasn't posting a lot back then, which wasn't unusual, but I started paying attention to the captions and the comments. One post caught my eye. It was a picture of her and some coworkers at a happy hour. Everyone looked drunk, laughing, and there was a guy standing next to her. Tall, athletic, and grinning like he owned the world. The caption read, "Work family red heart #grateful." I zoomed in on the picture. My wife had her hand on the table, but if you looked closely, the guy next to her, Ryan, had his hand resting just behind hers like he was about to grab it. Could have been nothing, but it stuck with me. Then, I remembered something I'd completely forgotten. During that time, she'd gotten a second phone for work. She'd said it was something her job provided for clients to reach her after hours. I hadn't thought much about it then because, honestly, I was too wrapped up in my own stress to care. But now, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, after she fell asleep, I went digging in our storage closet. Took me over an hour to find it, tucked away in an old box with some random cables and junk. The phone was dead, of course, but I plugged it in to charge. While it powered up, I sat on the floor, staring at it like it was Pandora's box. When the screen lit up, I felt my stomach twist. The lock screen had a picture of her and me, smiling like everything was perfect. But once I got into the phone, it was like opening a time capsule I wasn't ready for. The Messages app had been wiped clean, at least most of it. But there was one contact still saved. It wasn't under Ryan or any obvious name. It was just saved as R. I opened the thread, and there were only 2 messages still there. The first was from her, sent late at night. Can't stop thinking about today. Call me when you're alone. The second message was from him. You're going to get us caught if you keep texting. Let's stick to work emails. My chest felt tight. Couldn't breathe. I stared at those 2 texts, trying to convince myself it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was just bad phrasing? Maybe it was about something completely innocent? But deep down I knew this wasn't work-related. I copied the number into my phone before I turned the old one off and put it back in the box. Then I went back to bed, lying next to her, my heart pounding so loud I swore she could hear it. I wanted to confront her right then and there. I wanted to wake her up and demand the truth. But something in me stopped. I didn't just want to confront her. I wanted the whole story first. I wanted to know every detail before I looked her in the eye and asked her if she thought I was that much of an idiot. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. Not work, not conversations, nothing. My head was spinning. Who the hell was this R? Was it Ryan? Did I really want to call the number I'd saved? I decided to reach out to the one person I knew I could trust with something like this. My best friend, Mark. Mark had been my rock for years. The guy who'd talked me through some of the toughest moments in my life. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. When I told him about the email, the phone, and the messages, he didn't laugh. He didn't say I was being crazy or paranoid. Instead, he just nodded, his face serious. Look, man, he said after a long pause. I'm not saying she did anything, but I remember that time. She wasn't herself. She was distant. I figured it was just because you guys were going through so much. But now, I don't know. That wasn't what I wanted to hear. But it was the confirmation I needed to keep digging. Mark leaned forward, lowering his voice. If I were you, I'd find out everything before you confront her. Phone records, bank statements, whatever you can get your hands on. Don't give her the chance to lie her way out of it. He was right. I didn't just want suspicions, I wanted proof. And if she thought I was going to let this go, she didn't know me as well as I thought she did. I spent the next few nights in full-on detective mode. I didn't sleep much, and when I did, it was restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 2 texts on her old phone, playing over and over in my head. I couldn't help but wonder, how far did this go? Was it just a fling? Or was there more she'd been hiding? Mark's advice had stuck with me. I needed proof. Hard proof. So I started digging. The first thing I did was pull up our old phone records. Took some effort, but our cell provider let me download detailed statements from 10 years ago. I spent hours combing through them, highlighting every number that seemed out of place. Her work phone popped up a lot, but what stood out even more was a single number that showed up dozens, no hundreds, of times over a few months. It wasn't saved in her contacts, but I recognized it immediately. It was R. The calls and texts were constant. Some days there were more than a dozen back-and-forth messages, starting early in the morning and going late into the night. A lot of those late-night calls happened on the nights she worked late. And oddly enough, there were long gaps where she didn't call or text me at all. But R? She never missed a day. The worst part? There were weekends. Days when I knew we were supposed to be spending time together as a family. Days I thought we'd been trying to fix our marriage. Couldn't believe it. Next, I went through old bank statements. This part was harder to stomach because it felt so invasive, like I was picking apart my own life, looking for cracks I didn't even know were there. I started noticing charges I didn't remember, small ones mostly, coffee shops, restaurants, gas stations. But then there were bigger ones, like a hotel charge from out of town on a weekend when I thought she was at a work conference. It wasn't much, just a one-night stay, but when I checked my calendar from that time, I realized she'd lied about where she was. A conference? No, she was with him. And then there were receipts. I found an old shoebox where she kept random papers, old pay stubs, warranty info, and, unfortunately for her, a few receipts from that time. One caught my eye immediately: 2 tickets to a concert. A band I hated. She never mentioned going, and I sure as hell wasn't with her. I felt like I was going to be sick. All the little pieces were coming together, and it was getting harder and harder to keep myself calm. I could barely look at her without feeling like I was going to explode. She must have noticed something was up because she kept asking me if I was okay. Yeah, fine, I'd say. Just tired from work. But I wasn't fine. I wasn't even close. I kept thinking back to that damn email. Ask her about Ryan. She'll lie. Whoever sent it wasn't just trolling, they knew. They knew what happened, and they wanted me to know too. The question was, why now? Why send it at all? That night, I sat in bed, staring at my phone. I had ours number saved, but I hadn't worked up the nerve to call it yet. I wasn't sure what I was even hoping to get out of it. Did I think he'd confess? Apologize? Tell me something I didn't already know? I didn't get the chance to decide. While I was debating with myself, I noticed my wife's phone on the nightstand. She was in the shower, so I grabbed it. My hands were shaking. I opened her messages, scrolling through her recent chats. Nothing looked out of place. Most of it was family group texts, friends, and coworkers. But then I opened her archived chats, and there it was, Ryan. The thread was short, only a few messages from years ago. Most of it was innocent enough. Hey! Great seeing you today. Hope the meeting goes well. Thanks for listening the other night. You always know what to say. But one message hit me like a punch to the gut. I can't stop thinking about you. I wish things were different. The timestamp was from the week she stayed at that hotel. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. She hadn't just lied to me. She'd fallen for him. Before I could keep reading, I heard the water shut off. I panicked, locking the phone and setting it back on the nightstand. She came into the room a few minutes later, smiling like everything was normal. I couldn't even look at her. I needed answers. I couldn't wait anymore. The next morning, I texted Ryan. I thought about what to say for a long time, but in the end, I kept it simple. This is my name. I think you know who I am. We need to talk. It didn't take long for him to reply. I don't know what you're talking about. Leave me alone. I didn't back down. You know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't want me to show up at your job or your house, you'll talk to me. That got his attention. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed with another message. Fine, call me, but I'm only doing this once. I stepped outside and dialed his number, pacing in my driveway as the phone rang. My heart was racing. Finally, he picked up. Yeah. His voice was sharp, defensive. This is my name. My wife is wife's name. You remember her. There was a pause. What do you want? The truth, I said. Don't lie to me. I already know you were seeing her behind my back. I just want to hear it from you. For a second, I thought he was going to hang up. But then he sighed. Look, man, I don't want to get in the middle of your shit. That was a long time ago. So it's true? I asked. My voice was shaking. Yeah, that was it. No excuse, no denial. Just a flat-out confirmation that my wife had cheated on me. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. For a second, I couldn't even speak. I finally managed to get the words out. How long? He sighed on the other end of the line like he was annoyed I was even asking. Look, man, it was a long time ago. I don't remember every detail. Okay? Try, I said, my voice low, almost shaking. There was a pause. It wasn't that serious. It was a few months, maybe 3 or 4. I don't know exactly. And it wasn't serious? I spat. You mean screwing another man's wife wasn't serious? He didn't answer right away. When he spoke again, his tone was defensive. She told me your marriage was over. She said you two were practically separated. living like roommates. How was I supposed to know she wasn't telling the truth? The words hit me like a slap in the face. My wife told him our marriage was over? Was that how she justified it to herself? Or was that how she got him into bed without feeling guilty? And where did this happen? I demanded. I'm not getting into specifics, he said, his voice rising. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know things were like this. I didn't mean to cause problems for you. Cause problems? I laughed bitterly. You didn't cause problems. You blew up my entire Angie life. Man, I'm done with this conversation, he said, his tone sharp now. I'm sorry, but I've got nothing else to say. It's over. It's been over for years. Deal with it. The line went dead. I stood there in the driveway, gripping my phone so hard I thought I might break it. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Deal with it? How the hell was I supposed to deal with something like this? When I went back inside, my wife was in the kitchen, drinking coffee like it was just another morning. She smiled when she saw me, but I could see the tension in her eyes. She must have known something was off. We need to talk, I said, my voice colder than I intended. Her smile faded immediately. What's wrong? I didn't answer. I walked into the living room, and she followed me, sitting down on the couch. I stayed standing, pacing in front of her. I talked to Ryan, I said, watching her face closely. The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to say something but couldn't seem to find the words. So you're not going to deny it? I asked, my voice sharp. She closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. I was going to tell you, she whispered. Were you? I snapped. Because it's been 10 years, and you sure as hell haven't said anything. I didn't know how, she said, her voice breaking. I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you. Oh, so you lied to me instead? You let me sit here for 10 years, thinking we had a happy marriage, while you kept this huge secret from me. Tears were streaming down her face now. It wasn't like that, she said. It wasn't planned. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Yeah, sure. Affairs just happen. She wiped her face with her sleeve, trying to pull herself together. It was during that rough time, she said quietly, when we were fighting all the time, and you were so distant. So this is my fault? I asked, my voice rising. Because I was struggling after losing my job? That gives you a free pass to sleep with someone else? No, she said quickly. That's not what I meant. I'm not blaming you. I was lonely. And Ryan, he was there. He listened to me when I felt like you wouldn't. Her words stung more than I expected. As much as I wanted to scream at her, part of me hated that I understood what she meant. Things really had been bad between us back then. But that didn't justify what she did. So how far did it go? I asked, crossing my arms. She hesitated, then finally said, it was just emotional. We never, you know. I laughed bitterly. You're lying. I'm not, she insisted. I swear we never slept together. Funny, because Ryan said otherwise. I shot back. Her face fell. You're lying, she said weakly, as if she didn't even believe her own words. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, and read the messages I'd copied from the old work phone. Can't stop thinking about today. Call me when you're alone. I glanced up at her. Just emotional, huh? She started crying again, full-on sobbing this time. I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. Not yet. After what felt like hours of back and forth, she finally admitted the truth. She'd slept with Ryan. She claimed it only happened a few times. But at this point, I didn't believe a word she said. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked. Why not confess back then, when we were trying to fix things? She wiped her tears, shaking her head. Because I was ashamed, she said. I thought if I told you it would destroy us. And I couldn't lose you. You lost me the moment you decided to cheat, I said coldly. Her sobbing turned into a quiet, defeated silence. She just sat there, staring at the floor, while I stood there trying to figure out what the hell to do next. Is that everything? I asked finally. Or are there more secrets you've been hiding from me? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. There's nothing else, she whispered. I didn't believe her. Couldn't sleep that night. After her confession, she went upstairs to the bedroom, crying, while I stayed downstairs on the couch, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts were a mess. Rage, heartbreak, confusion. It all kept swirling together, refusing to let me rest. She said there was nothing else to confess, that Ryan was the only one, but I didn't trust her anymore. How could I? She'd lied to my face for 10 years. What were the chances this was really the whole story? I felt like I was drowning in questions I couldn't answer. Did Ryan mean something to her? Or was he just some random fling? How could she look me in the eye every day, kiss me, say I love you, and act like nothing happened? And the worst question of all, how much of our life together was a lie? I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I wasn't done searching. The next morning, I went through her phone again. I didn't even try to hide it. I didn't care if she caught me. I searched everything. Her messages, emails, call logs, even her social media accounts. Most of it seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. That's when I remembered her laptop. She rarely used it these days, mostly just for work when she wasn't on her phone. But back then, she'd used it all the time. I found it sitting on the bookshelf in our office, gathering dust. When I opened it, the battery was dead, so I plugged it in and waited. Once it booted up, I started digging. At first, there wasn't much. Old emails about work, pictures of our family, receipts for things she'd bought over the years. Nothing that screamed affair. But then I opened her browser history, and that's where things got interesting. There were searches that didn't make sense. Hotel bookings, how to keep an affair secret, emotional affair or more. My stomach churned as I scrolled through them, piecing together her state of mind during that time. It wasn't just one mistake. She'd actively researched how to cover it up. And then I found something else. There was a folder on her desktop, hidden inside another folder labeled taxes. It was password protected. My hands shook as I tried the obvious options. Our anniversary, her birthday, our daughter's birthday. Nothing worked. Then I thought about Ryan. I tried his first name, nothing. His last name, nothing. Then I typed in the date of the hotel stay I'd found in the receipts, and the folder opened. Inside were dozens of pictures, screenshots, and saved messages. Some of them were from him. Texts about how much he missed her, how he couldn't wait to see her again. But the worst part was the photos. There were selfies of the two of them together, smiling and laughing like they were on some romantic getaway. One of them was taken in a hotel room I didn't recognize, with her lying on the bed, her hair messy and her smile wide. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely scroll. I slammed the laptop shut and leaned back in the chair, my heart racing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She'd kept these. For 10 years, she'd hidden this folder, holding on to these memories like some sick little secret. Why? I didn't confront her right away. Couldn't. I was too angry, too hurt, and I knew if I said something now, I'd lose it. Instead, I went back to Mark's place. I sat on his couch, staring at the wall, while he handed me a beer. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. I told him everything about the laptop, the photos, the texts. He listened quietly, his expression darkening with every word. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "Man, that's F asterisk 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 et up," he said. "Yeah, no kidding," I muttered. "What are you gonna do?" I shook my head. "I don't know. I feel like I don't even know who she is anymore. Like, what else is she hiding? What if Ryan wasn't the only one?" Mark didn't say anything for a moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. "Have you ever thought about checking her old work stuff? Like her email?" It hadn't occurred to me until he said it, but the idea clicked instantly. If there was one place she wouldn't think to cover her tracks, it was her old work email. That night, after she went to bed, I grabbed the laptop again. Her work email account was still saved in her browser, but the password wasn't. I tried a few guesses, her usual passwords, variations of her name, but nothing worked. Then I remembered the folder. The hotel date. I typed it in and the account opened. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The emails between her and Ryan weren't just friendly. They were flirty, intimate, and in some cases, downright explicit. They talked about things they'd done together, places they wanted to go, even plans for a future that didn't include me. But that wasn't the worst part. Buried in the thread was another name, Jason. The emails mentioned him casually, like he was some kind of inside joke between them. At first, I thought he was just another coworker. But the more I read, the clearer it became. Jason wasn't just a name. He was someone she'd been with, too. One of the emails from Ryan read, "Does Jason know about us? Or are you keeping him in the dark, too?" I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. Jason? Who the hell was Jason? Was he before Ryan? After? At the same time, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in anymore. She was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I walked in with the laptop. I slammed it down on the counter, and she jumped. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. Her eyes widened when she saw the screen. She didn't say anything, but I could see the panic in her face. "You lied to me," I said. "Again. You told me it was just Ryan. You told me it was just one mistake. So who the hell is Jason?" Her face crumpled, and she burst into tears. But I wasn't moved. I didn't care. "How many were there?" I asked, my voice rising. "How many F*******ng guys were there?" "Jason wasn't like that," she sobbed. "It wasn't the same. I don't care how it was," I shouted. "You cheated on me. Over and over again. And you've been lying about it for 10 F*******ng years." Her sobbing echoed in the kitchen, but all I felt was cold fury. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, waiting for her to answer me. She didn't say anything for a while, just kept crying into her hands. Finally, I slammed my hand down on the counter, hard enough to make her jump. "Stop crying and talk to me," I said, my voice low and sharp. "Who the hell is Jason?" She wiped her face with trembling hands and looked up at me. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Not what I think?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Then why don't you enlighten me? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you had more than one affair, and you've been lying about it for 10 goddamn years." Her lips quivered. "Jason was someone I leaned on. He was a friend." I shook my head. "Cut the bullshit. Don't insult my intelligence." I grabbed the laptop and opened the email I'd found, shoving it in front of her. "This doesn't look like a friend. Ryan knew about him. He even joked about you keeping Jason in the dark about your thing with him. So no, I'm not buying the friend excuse. Tell me the truth." Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands again. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice muffled. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "So it did happen," I said quietly. "You were with Jason too." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I leaned back against the counter, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. Was it before Ryan? After? Or at the same time? Her silence was answer enough. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Jesus Christ. 2 guys. At the same time. And you want me to believe it's not what I think? Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. "Please," she begged. "Just let me explain." Against my better judgment, I let her talk. She told me that Jason was her emotional support during the worst parts of our marriage. He was a coworker, too. Someone she'd known even before Ryan. She claimed it started off innocent, just venting to each other about life and work. But then it escalated. Late-night phone calls turned into lunch dates, and eventually, it crossed the line. "It didn't last long," she said. "I ended it before it got too serious." "Oh, so you cheated less with him?" I snapped. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" She flinched but kept talking. "After Jason, I tried to focus on us again. I wanted to fix things. But then Ryan came along. Her voice broke as she said his name, like it was painful for her to even say it out loud. Ryan was different. He was persistent. I didn't mean for it to happen with him either. But it did. I finished for her. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't love him, she said quickly. I didn't love either of them. It was never about that. I was broken. We were broken. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I stared at her. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. And you thought the way to deal with it was to sleep with 2 of your coworkers? To lie to me for years? To pretend like none of it ever happened? She sobbed harder, unable to answer. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the house, ignoring her cries as she begged me not to leave. I needed air. I needed space. I ended up at Mark's place again. He opened the door and took one look at me before stepping aside to let me in. Let me guess, he said. It got worse. I sank into his couch and rubbed my hands over my face. She admitted there was another guy. Jason. Mark's eyes widened. Another guy? Are you serious? Yep. And it gets better. She was with both of them at the same time. Ryan and Jason. I laughed bitterly. I'm married to a damn soap opera character. Mark let out a low whistle. Man, I don't even know what to say. That's messed up. Yeah, no kidding, I muttered. He handed me a beer and sat down across from me. So what now? I shrugged. I have no idea. Every time I think I've hit rock bottom, I find out there's another layer of lies. I don't even know how to feel anymore. You feel betrayed, Mark said. And you should. She lied to you for years, dude. And not just once, this is a pattern. Are you sure you want to keep putting yourself through this? I stared at the floor, his words sinking in. I didn't have an answer. The next day, I went home, still unsure of what I was going to do. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, her face pale and her eyes puffy from crying. She looked up at me with this pitiful expression, like she was waiting for me to yell at her again. But I didn't have the energy. We need to talk, she said quietly. I dropped my keys on the table and sighed. I think we've talked enough. No, she said firmly, standing up. There's more. You need to know everything. I raised an eyebrow. More. She nodded, biting her lip. I've been thinking about it all night. And you're right, you deserve the full truth. I've been lying to you for too long. I crossed my arms. So what else are you hiding? Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. There's one more thing, she said. And you're not going to like it. My stomach dropped as she handed me the phone. What is this? It's a text, she said. From Ryan. He reached out a few months ago. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. You're still in contact with him? No, she said quickly. I ignored him. I swear I didn't respond. But he texted me out of the blue, and I didn't know how to tell you. I opened the text thread, and there it was. The last message was from 3 months ago. Hey, been thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay. Would love to catch up sometime. My blood boiled. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered. I didn't respond, she said again. I swear. I deleted his number after that. I slammed the phone down on the table, my vision blurry with anger. How am I supposed to believe anything you say anymore? Every time you open your mouth, it's another lie. She started crying again, but I didn't care. I was done feeling sorry for her. You should have told me, I said. The second he reached out, you should have told me. Instead, you hid it, just like you've been hiding everything else. I didn't want to hurt you, she sobbed. I laughed bitterly. Yeah, well, mission failed. After she told me about Ryan's recent text, I couldn't even look at her anymore. The idea that she'd kept something like that from me, again, was the final straw. I left the house without saying another word. This time, I didn't go to Mark's. I just drove. No destination, no plan. I needed to get away to clear my head. But instead of clarity, all I got was more questions. Why had Ryan texted her? Did he still have feelings for her after all these years? Was this really the only time he'd tried to contact her? Or was this just the time she admitted to? And why the hell did she hold onto this secret for months instead of coming clean the moment it happened? The deeper I dug into my own thoughts, the angrier I got. She kept saying she didn't want to hurt me, but what did she think hiding all this would do? If anything, it made it worse. By the time I turned the car around and headed home, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit back and let her drip feed me the truth anymore. I was going to find out everything, with or without her help. When I got home, she was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her coffee. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't know if you were coming back," she said quietly. I ignored her and went straight upstairs. I could hear her start to cry again, but I didn't stop. I had work to do. I grabbed the laptop, her phone, and every old document I could find. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, anything that might give me some insight into what had really been going on all those years ago. She'd already confessed to Ryan and Jason, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she wasn't telling me. I started with the basics, her phone records from that time. I'd already combed through a lot of them, but now I looked at them with fresh eyes. The pattern with Ryan was obvious. Constant texts and calls, always at odd hours. But there were other numbers too. One in particular stood out. It wasn't Ryan's and it wasn't Jason's. This number popped up sporadically, sometimes weeks apart, but always late at night. And every time there was a call to or from this number, it was followed by a call to Ryan shortly after. It felt off, like she was triangulating. I copied the number into my phone and did a reverse lookup online. Nothing came up. No name, no address, just a generic carrier listing. The next step was her bank statements. I'd already found the hotel charge and the concert tickets, but now I was looking for anything else that didn't add up. And there it was. A series of payments to a flower shop. Not our usual florist, either. This was a different shop, one in a part of town we rarely went to. The payments were spread out over a few months, all during the time she was seeing Ryan and Jason. I couldn't help but wonder, were those flowers for them? I wanted to throw something, to scream, to do something to let out the rage boiling inside me. Instead, I wrote down the shop's name and made a plan to stop by the next day. That night, she tried to talk to me again. "Can we please sit down?" she asked, standing in the doorway of the office while I was still buried in documents. I didn't even look at her. "Not now. Please," she said, her voice cracking. "I know you're mad. But, mad," I snapped, finally turning to face her. "Mad doesn't even begin to cover it. I don't trust you, okay? Every time you say something, it's another lie or another half-truth. And I'm done playing detective just to get the facts out of you." She flinched, tears brimming in her eyes again. But this time I didn't care. "I told you everything," she whispered. I laughed bitterly. "No, you didn't. If you had, I wouldn't be sitting here piecing it all together myself. You think you can just cry and apologize and I'll forget about all this? That's not how it works." She didn't respond, and I turned back to the laptop. After a long moment, I heard her footsteps retreating down the hall. The next day, I went to the flower shop. I walked in, feeling ridiculous, but I needed answers. The woman behind the counter smiled warmly. "Hi, how can I help you?" I hesitated for a moment, then pulled out my phone to show her a picture of my wife. "Do you recognize her?" I asked. The woman looked at the picture, then at me, her smile fading slightly. Yeah," she said slowly. "She used to come in here a while back." "Why? Do you remember what she bought?" I asked, my stomach tightening. The woman hesitated, glancing around like she wasn't sure if she should answer. "Well, she always bought roses. Red ones. She said they were for someone special." "Someone special?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did she ever say who they were for?" "No," the woman said quickly. She came in a few times and then she stopped. That's all I know." I nodded, thanking her, and walked out. My head was spinning. Red roses for someone special. Was that Ryan? Jason? Or was there someone else entirely? That night I confronted her again. "Why don't you just tell me the truth?" I said, slamming the flower shop receipt down on the table in front of her. She looked at it, then at me, her face pale. "What is this?" "You know exactly what it is," I said. "You were buying roses for someone." "Who?" Her hands started to shake. "I told you it was just Ryan and Jason." "Don't lie to me," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "Who the hell were the flowers for?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she finally whispered, "They were for Ryan." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. Of course they were, because screwing him wasn't enough, right? You had to go all out and make it romantic. She didn't answer. She just sat there crying silently. And that's when I realized something. She wasn't going to tell me the full truth. Not now, not ever. If I wanted to know everything, I was going to have to dig deeper. And I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered it all. At this point, I wasn't just angry, I was obsessed. It wasn't enough to know about Ryan or Jason or the damn flowers. I needed the full story. Every lie, every secret, every betrayal. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized something didn't add up. The flower shop, the hidden folder on her laptop, the phone calls to that unknown number. There were too many loose ends. I felt like I was missing the bigger picture, and it was driving me insane. I started with the unknown number. I tried a reverse lookup before, but I decided to dig deeper this time. I used one of those paid background check services to trace the number. It took a few hours, but eventually, I got a name. Michael Barrett. The name didn't ring any bells, but that only made it worse. Who the hell was Michael, and why had she been calling him so late at night during the same time she was seeing Ryan and Jason? I looked him up online. He wasn't a coworker. He was some guy who ran a small business in the next town over. His social media was private, so I couldn't see much, but his LinkedIn profile showed he owned a landscaping company. I couldn't figure out how he fit into all this, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to find out. That night, I confronted her again. "Who's Michael?" I asked, holding up the printout of his information. Her face went blank, and for a second, I thought she might try to deny it. But then she just closed her eyes and sighed. "How did you?" "That's not the question," I snapped. "The question is, who is he?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she was struggling to find the words. Finally, she said, "He's no one. It was nothing." I laughed bitterly. "You really expect me to believe that? You called him dozens of times, always late at night. Who is he?" Her hands were trembling. "He was just someone I talked to, that's all. I swear, nothing happened." "Nothing happened?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You've used that line before. Funny how it always turns out to be a lie." She started crying again. Big, heaving sobs that were so loud they made me want to cover my ears. But I wasn't going to let her tears distract me this time. "Tell me the truth," I said, my voice cold. "Was Michael another affair?" "No," she cried. "I mean, I don't know. I didn't sleep with him. We just talked." "Talked about what?" Her shoulders slumped, and she finally whispered, "About leaving you." Those 3 words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Leaving me?" I repeated, stunned. She nodded, wiping her face. "It was during that time when things were so bad between us. I didn't know if we were going to make it, and Michael, he listened. He made me feel like I had options." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "So you were planning to leave me for him?" "No," she said quickly. "It wasn't like that. I wasn't going to leave you for him. I was scared, and I needed someone to talk to. That's all it was." I swear, I didn't believe her. Not for a second. After she went to bed, I started digging into Michael's life. I found his business website, his address, even pictures of him with his family. He had a wife and 2 kids, which made my stomach turn. Did they know? Did his wife know he'd been having late-night conversations with my wife about ending her marriage? I couldn't stop myself. I drove to his house the next day. When I pulled up in front of his place, my hands were shaking. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know what I was going to say. I just knew I needed to see him face to face. I rang the doorbell, and after a few minutes, a man opened the door. He looked to be in his late 40s, with graying hair and a cautious expression. Michael Barrett? I asked. He frowned. Yeah. Who's asking? I took a deep breath. My name. I think you know my wife's name. His face changed instantly. His eyes widened, and his whole body stiffened like I just punched him in the gut. Don't bother lying, I said. I know about the calls. I know about the late-night conversations. So why don't you just tell me the truth? He stepped outside, closing the door behind him, and glanced around like he was afraid someone might overhear us. Look, man, he said, keeping his voice low. I don't know what she told you, but nothing happened between us. I swear. You expect me to believe that? I snapped. She admitted she was talking to you about leaving me. Is that nothing? He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, we talked, but that's all it was. She was going through a rough time, and I was just trying to help. Why? I asked. Why the hell would you get involved in someone else's marriage? He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, because I knew what it was like. My marriage was falling apart back then, too. We were both struggling, and I guess we just leaned on each other. I stared at him, my chest tight with anger. So you were both struggling, and you thought what? You'd run away together? Play happy family somewhere else? No, he said quickly. It was never like that. She loved you. She always talked about how much she wanted to fix things with you. Yeah. And then she went and screwed 2 other guys, I said bitterly. His face went pale. 2? I laughed without humor. Oh, you didn't know? Yeah. While you were playing therapist, she was sleeping with Ryan and Jason. So congratulations, you weren't even her backup plan. He looked like I'd slapped him. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, I said. Because she's a liar. She lied to me and she lied to you. And now I get to live with the aftermath. I walked away before he could say anything else, leaving him standing there on his front porch, looking stunned. As I drove home, I realized I didn't feel any better. Confronting him didn't give me the closure I'd hoped for. If anything, it just made me feel worse. Because now I knew the truth. My wife hadn't just betrayed me with her actions. She'd betrayed me with her thoughts, her feelings, her plans. She'd spent years lying to me, and I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. When I got home from confronting Michael, I felt completely drained. My hands were shaking as I dropped my keys on the counter, and for the first time in days, I felt like I didn't even have the energy to be angry. The house was quiet, almost unnervingly so. She wasn't in the kitchen or the living room. I found her upstairs, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. She looked up when I walked in, her face pale and puffy from crying. Where were you? She asked softly. I ignored the question. I talked to Michael, I said, watching her reaction closely. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes widening. You what? You heard me, I said coldly. I went to his house. He told me everything, or at least his version of everything. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she covered her face with her hands. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Why can't we just move forward? I laughed bitterly, leaning against the doorframe. Move forward? Are you serious? You've been lying to me for years. Do you have any idea what that does to someone? How the hell am I supposed to move forward when I can't trust a word you say? She didn't answer. Michael told me you used to talk to him about leaving me, I continued. So go ahead. Tell me the truth. Were you planning to leave me for him? No, she said quickly, her voice breaking. I wasn't going to leave you, I swear. I didn't know what to do. I was so confused, and everything felt so broken. He was just someone I could talk to. And Ryan? And Jason? I snapped. Were they just someone to talk to, too? She flinched, her shoulders shaking as she started crying again. I don't know what to say anymore, she whispered. I've told you everything. I've apologized. I don't know what else you want from me. I want the truth, I said, my voice rising. All of it. No more half-truths, no more lies by omission. I want to know everything you did, everything you said, everything you felt. Because right now, I don't even know who you are anymore. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I'm still me, she said desperately. I'm still the woman you married. I'm still the mother of your daughter. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I love you. I always have. I stared at her, my jaw tight. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. That night, I slept on the couch again. Well, I didn't really sleep. I just lay there in the dark, replaying everything over and over in my head. I thought about how things used to be between us. The good times before everything fell apart. The way she used to look at me, like I was the center of her world. How happy we were when our daughter was born. And then I thought about the lies. The hotel stays, the secret texts, the flowers. The folder on her laptop. The 2 men she admitted to, and the one I had to find out about on my own. I thought about Michael's words. She loved you. She always talked about how much she wanted to fix things with you. If that was true, why did she keep lying? Why did she hold on to all those memories of Ryan and Jason, hiding them like some kind of sick trophy? I didn't have any answers. The next morning, things came to a head. I was in the kitchen, drinking coffee, when she came downstairs. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red and swollen. She sat down across from me at the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I called my mom last night, she said quietly. I looked up at her, confused. Okay. And she hesitated, her voice trembling. I told her what's been going on. I told her I messed up. I told her everything. I raised an eyebrow. Everything? Or just the parts that make you look like a victim? She flinched, but she didn't argue. She thinks, maybe we should try counseling, she said. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Counseling? Really? You think some therapist is going to wave a magic wand and fix this? It's worth a try, she said softly. Please. For our family. For our daughter. Our daughter. The mention of her name sent a pang of guilt through my chest. She didn't know what was going on. Not yet. But she wasn't stupid. She'd noticed the tension, the arguments. She'd asked me just last week if everything was okay between us. What the hell was I supposed to tell her? I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. I don't know if counseling is going to fix this, I said honestly. She reached across the table, grabbing my hand. I'll do anything, she said desperately. I'll go to counseling, I'll quit my job, I'll cut off contact with anyone you want. Anything. Just please, don't give up on us. I pulled my hand away, unable to meet her eyes. I need time to think, I said quietly. I spent the rest of the day avoiding her, burying myself in work and chores around the house. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the decision loomed over me like a storm cloud. Stay and try to fix things, or walk away and start over. I knew it wasn't just about me. It was about our daughter, too. If I left, it would destroy her world. But if I stayed, would I ever be able to look at my wife the same way again? That night, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at the wedding photo hanging on the wall. I used to love that picture. The way we were smiling, the way she was looking at me like I was the only man in the world. Now, it just felt like a cruel reminder of what I'd lost. The breaking point came the next day. I was in the middle of cleaning out the garage when my daughter came out to find me. She stood there for a moment, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, before finally blurting out, "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" I froze, my heart sinking. "What? No, honey, why would you ask that?" She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "You've been yelling a lot, and you're always on the couch now." I sighed, crouching down to her level. "Your mom and I are just going through a rough time right now," I said carefully. "But we both love you very much. That's never going to change." She nodded, but her eyes were filled with tears. "I don't want you to break up," she said softly. My chest tightened, and I pulled her into a hug. "I don't want that either," I whispered. But as I held her, I couldn't help but wonder. Was staying together really the right thing to do? Or was it just delaying the inevitable? After that conversation with my daughter, I felt like I was unraveling. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. I don't want you to break up. It broke me in ways I didn't even know I could break. But here's the thing. Staying for the sake of your child sounds noble on paper, but when you're drowning in resentment, it's not that simple. And I was drowning. Every time I looked at my wife, I felt the lies hanging in the air between us, thick and suffocating. The tension in the house was unbearable. My wife walked on eggshells around me, trying her best to act normal, but everything she did just felt fake. Forced smiles, over-the-top affection toward our daughter, cooking meals like she was auditioning for some Homemaker of the Year award. I hated it, because no matter what she did, the past was still there. One evening, a few days after my daughter's question, I walked into the living room to find her sitting with my wife. They were flipping through an old photo album, laughing at pictures from years ago. I stood in the doorway watching them. My daughter looked so happy, so carefree, but my wife, she looked tense, like she knew I was standing there, judging her. And she wasn't wrong. My daughter glanced up and saw me. "Dad, look," she said, holding up the album. "Do you remember this trip? Mom was so scared of the roller coaster." I forced a smile. "Yeah, I remember." She laughed and turned back to the pictures, but my wife kept her eyes on me. It wasn't anger or guilt in her expression. It was pleading. A silent "please don't ruin this moment." I turned and walked out without a word. That night, my wife came into the office where I'd been hiding for hours. She closed the door behind her and stood there, wringing her hands. "We need to talk," she said softly. I didn't look up from my computer. "We've done enough talking. Please," she said, her voice trembling. "We can't keep living like this. It's not fair to any of us." I sighed and leaned back in my chair, finally meeting her eyes. "You're right," I said. "It's not fair. But whose fault is that?" Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at the floor. "I know I can't undo what I did," she said. "But I need to know, do you even want to try? Or are we just waiting for the inevitable?" The word inevitable hit me like a punch to the gut. Because honestly, that's exactly how it felt. Like we were delaying the end, dragging it out for the sake of appearances, for our daughter, for whatever shred of normalcy we could hold on to. "I don't know," I admitted. Her voice cracked. "Do you still love me?" I hesitated. For the first time, I didn't have an answer. The next day, I went to see Mark. He'd been my sounding board through this whole mess, and I needed his advice more than ever. I told him about the conversation with my daughter, about how torn I felt. "Do you think staying is the right thing to do?" I asked. Mark scratched his beard, looking thoughtful. "I think the right thing is whatever keeps you sane," he said. "Look, man, I get wanting to stay for your kid, but if being here is eating you alive, what good are you to her? She doesn't need two parents who hate each other. She needs at least one who's whole." "Yeah, but what if leaving breaks her?" I said. Mark shook his head. "Kids are resilient. What breaks them isn't the divorce. It's the way it's handled. If you and your wife can co-parent without turning it into a war zone, your daughter will be okay. But if you stay and just let the resentment build, she'll feel that. Kids always feel it." His words stuck with me, because he was right. My daughter wasn't stupid. She already knew something was wrong, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. Staying for her wouldn't work if it meant staying miserable. That evening, I told my wife we needed to talk. She looked terrified when I said it, like she already knew what was coming. But she sat down with me at the table anyway, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot," I said, "about us, about our daughter, about everything." She didn't say anything, just nodded silently, waiting for me to continue. "I don't think I can keep doing this," I said finally. "I've tried. God knows I've tried. But every time I look at you, I see the lies, the betrayal, and I don't know if I can get past it." Her face crumpled, and she started crying again. But this time I didn't feel the usual pang of guilt. I just felt tired. "I don't want to fight with you," I said. "I don't want to make this ugly. But I think we both know this isn't working." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "You want a divorce?" I hesitated. The word felt so final, so heavy. But after everything, wasn't that where we were headed? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe we take some time apart and figure out what we really want. But I can't keep living like this, pretending everything's fine when it's not. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. I'll do whatever you need, she said. If you need space, I'll give you space. If you want counseling, I'll go. I just want to fix this. I don't know if it's fixable, I said quietly. That night, I slept in our daughter's room. She didn't ask why. I think she just liked having me there. We stayed up late, watching cartoons on her tablet until she fell asleep curled up next to me. And as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. No matter what happened between me and my wife, my daughter was the only thing that truly mattered. I wasn't going to let her grow up in a house full of tension and unspoken resentment. I wasn't going to let her feel like she had to pick sides. Whatever decision I made, it had to be for her. The next morning, I woke up to my daughter's tiny arms wrapped around me. For a split second, I forgot about everything, the lies, the betrayal, the pain. It was just me and her, and in that moment, I felt like I could breathe again. But the feeling didn't last. As soon as I walked downstairs and saw my wife sitting at the table, staring into her coffee, the weight of everything came crashing back. She looked up at me, her eyes hopeful and exhausted at the same time. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to avoid it, to push it off like I had so many times before. But deep down, I knew it was time to face reality. I couldn't keep living in limbo. Not for me, not for her, and definitely not for our daughter. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many of our arguments had started. But this time it wasn't a fight. It wasn't even really a conversation. It was me finally making a decision. "I've thought about it a lot," I said, my voice steady but quiet. "And I think the best thing for us, for all of us, is to take some time apart." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to break down again. But she just nodded, tears silently falling down her cheeks. "If we stay together like this," I continued, "it's only going to hurt us more. And it's going to hurt her." I gestured toward the stairs, where our daughter was still asleep. "She doesn't deserve to grow up in a house full of tension. She deserves better than that." She wiped her face, her hands trembling. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "No," I admitted. "I'm not sure about anything right now. But I know I can't keep going like this." She nodded again, swallowing hard. "Okay," she whispered. "If this is what you need, I'll respect it." Her willingness to step back surprised me. I'd half expected her to beg me to reconsider, to promise again that she'd do anything to fix things. But she didn't. Maybe she finally understood that this wasn't something she could fix with promises or tears. That evening, I packed a bag and left. It wasn't a dramatic exit. There was no yelling, no slamming of doors. I hugged my daughter tightly and told her I'd see her in a few days. I didn't tell her the whole truth. I couldn't bring myself to. But I did say that I needed a little time to think and that everything was going to be okay. She clung to me, asking when I'd be back. I told her soon, and as I walked out the door, the guilt of leaving her behind nearly crushed me. I drove to Mark's place, where he'd already cleared out the spare room for me. "You can stay as long as you need," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Thanks," I said quietly, but as grateful as I was, all I could feel was emptiness. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. My wife and I kept our distance, communicating only when it came to our daughter. We didn't argue. We didn't try to hash things out. We just coexisted from a distance. I started seeing a therapist during that time, hoping they could help me make sense of everything. The sessions were hard, especially the first few. I had to dig into feelings I'd been avoiding for weeks. Anger, sadness, betrayal. "You're grieving," my therapist said during one session. "Not just for the marriage you had, but for the life you thought you had. That's not something you get over in a day or a week. It takes time." I nodded, even though I didn't really believe it at the time. It didn't feel like something I could ever get over. One evening, a few weeks into our separation, I went to pick up my daughter for the weekend. When I walked into the house, my wife was in the kitchen, making dinner. She looked up when I walked in, her expression cautious but calm. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Our daughter came running down the stairs, throwing herself into my arms. "I missed you," she said, her face lighting up. "I missed you too, kiddo," I said, hugging her tightly. As I was getting her things together, my wife approached me. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if she should speak. Finally, she said, "How are you?" It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard. "I'm okay," I said after a moment. She nodded, biting her lip. "I just wanted to say, thank you for giving me space. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I know I have a long way to go, but I'm working on myself. I'm trying." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to believe her, but the other part, the part that had been burned so many times, was still wary. "Good," I said finally. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't push it. That night, after my daughter fell asleep, I sat in the quiet of Mark's spare room, thinking about everything. I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But as much as I hated what she'd done, I didn't hate her. And that realization scared me more than anything. Because if I didn't hate her, did that mean there was still a chance? The weeks of separation stretched into months. I'd like to say the time apart gave me all the clarity I needed, that the answers fell neatly into place, but life's never that simple. Some days I felt like I could move on and rebuild, whether it was with her or without her. Other days, the weight of the betrayal still crushed me, and I wondered if I'd ever be able to look at her without seeing the lies. But one thing was clear. I needed to make a decision. Staying in limbo wasn't fair, to me, to her, or to our daughter. One Saturday afternoon, my wife called me while I was at the park with our daughter. "Can we meet for coffee?" she asked. Her voice sounded steady, calm, but I could hear the faint hint of nerves underneath. "What's this about?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I need to say something." "Please," she said. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to shut her out completely. But something about her tone made me agree. "Okay," I said. "Tomorrow." We met at a small coffee shop downtown, the kind of quiet place where no one would overhear our conversation. She was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, nursing a cup of tea. She stood when she saw me, giving me a small, hesitant smile. "Hi," she said softly. I nodded. "Hi." We sat down, and for a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, but it was heavy. Finally, she broke it. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said, looking down at her hands. That caught me off guard. "Really?" She nodded. "I started about a month ago. I needed to. For myself. For our daughter. For you." I didn't respond, letting her continue. "The first few sessions were hard," she admitted. "I've had to face a lot of ugly truths about myself, about the choices I made. And I've realized I've spent so much of my life running away from my problems instead of dealing with them. That's why I lied to you for so long. I thought if I didn't talk about it, it would just go away." Her voice cracked, but she took a deep breath and kept going. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't ever take back. And I don't expect you to forgive me. Ever. But I wanted you to know that I'm not the same person I was back then. I'm trying to be better. Not just for you, but for myself." I stared at her, my emotions a tangled mess. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, the weight of her words. But after everything we'd been through, could I trust it? Could I trust her? "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't even know if I want to." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand," she said. I needed to say that. Whether we fix this or not, I needed you to know that I'm working on myself. And I'll keep working on myself, no matter what you decide." That conversation stuck with me. I kept replaying it in my head, the way she'd looked at me. Not with the desperation I'd seen before, but with something else. Something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. Like she finally understood that she couldn't control the outcome, only her actions. It was a far cry from the woman who had spent months begging me to stay, promising she'd change, but still hiding things from me. This felt different, and that scared me, because for the first time I wondered, if she really was changing, did I owe her and us a chance? A week later I called her. "Let's try counseling," I said, the words feeling heavy and foreign in my mouth. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "No," I admitted, "but I think it's worth a shot. For our daughter, if nothing else. But I'm not promising anything. This isn't about saving our marriage. It's about figuring out if there's anything left to save." "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you. I promise I won't waste this chance." The first few sessions were brutal. We unpacked years of resentment, anger, and pain. There were moments when I wanted to walk out of the room, when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But there were also moments when I saw glimpses of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The way she spoke about wanting to be a better person. The way she took full responsibility for her actions, without deflecting or making excuses. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were on the same team, even if the game had changed. One evening, after a particularly intense session, we sat in the car together. Neither of us saying a word. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared out the windshield, the weight of her question pressing down on me. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think we have a chance. And that's more than I would have said a few months ago." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "That's all I can ask for." It's been almost a year now since I found that email. We're still a work in progress, and honestly, I don't know if we'll ever fully heal from what happened. But we're trying. We've set boundaries, gone to therapy, and rebuilt trust. Slowly, painfully. I'm still not sure where this road will lead us. But for now, I've decided to stay. Not because of guilt or obligation or even for the sake of our daughter, but because I see real change in her. For the first time in years, I feel like we're moving forward. Not pretending, not avoiding, but actually moving forward. It's not perfect. It might never be perfect. But maybe, just maybe, it's enough. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more dramatic and intriguing tales, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and helps bring more exciting content your way. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in this situation? See you in the next story.